I wasn't supposed to be there that morning. I hadn't planned it. I wasn't dressed for anything but the usual old flats. My soft gray cardigan, no makeup. I just woke up with this strange urge to check something at the bank. Not even fear. Just a nudge. Like a whisper in the back of my mind that wouldn't let me sit still. The bedroom was quiet, except for the gentle ticking of the antique clock Robert had given me on our 30th anniversary. 5 years since he'd been gone. 5 years of learning to sleep on just one side of the bed, as if he might still come back to claim his space. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor he'd installed himself 40 years ago, back when we were young enough to believe our bodies would never betray us. Just a quick trip to the bank, I told my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back at me, gray hair pulled into a neat bun, crow's feet deepening around blue eyes that Robert always said reminded him of summer skies looked uncertain. At 68, I was used to questioning glances from younger people, as if my age alone made my presence in certain places suspicious. But this was different. This was my own doubt looking back at me. I grabbed my purse, locked the front door, and drove 7 minutes down to the branch on Belmont Avenue, the same one Robert and I had used for over 30 years. The parking lot was unusually empty for a Thursday. I remember thinking that. I stepped out, closed the car door gently, and walked toward the glass entrance, my reflection growing clearer with each step. My hands were steady, my breath normal. Nothing in me expected what I was about to witness, not a single part. The bank smelled like it always did, faintly of paper, and that particular cleaner they used on the counters. The security guard nodded at me as I entered. I nodded back, my fingers tightening around my purse strap. That's when I heard a familiar voice from across the lobby. As I mentioned, her condition has deteriorated rapidly in the last few months. The doctors are quite concerned. My son's voice. Brian. But Brian wasn't supposed to be here. Brian lived 30 minutes away and worked downtown. Brian had no reason to be at my bank at 9:17 on a Thursday morning. I slowed my pace, trying to locate him in the quiet lobby. Then I saw him, standing at the far end, just beyond the reception counter, wearing that pale gray suit he only puts on when he wants to seem professional, trustworthy, like when he gave that long, trembling speech asking for my permission to marry Heather 12 years ago. I'd known then that something in him was rehearsed. But this? He was speaking to the branch manager. Calm, composed, with a polite smile. He didn't see me walk in. I slipped behind the tall divider near the waiting area. Not hiding exactly, just observing. Something about his presence felt out of place. That's when I heard it. Her name is Diane Armstrong. We've been handling things for a while now. She doesn't recognize anyone in the family anymore. Her doctors agree it's progressing quickly. At this point, she's not expected to return to full awareness. I froze. That's my name. My full name. Coming from the mouth of my son. A man I had raised, loved, supported through college and 2 failed business ventures. She's under medical guardianship now, he continued, handing over a folder. We're just formalizing everything so the accounts don't get misused. She won't be returning. Not in any legal capacity. I couldn't breathe. For a moment, I thought maybe I had misunderstood, that he was talking about someone else, some other Diane Armstrong in her late 60s. But no, he was talking about me. I touched my own wrist, felt the pulse. I remembered what day it was, what street I lived on, and what my daughter-in-law's voice sounded like the last time she said, "You should really come over more often. Mom, Zoe misses you." I wasn't confused. I wasn't gone, and I sure as hell wasn't under any guardianship. My heart pounded against my ribs as Brian continued speaking with the branch manager, a middle-aged man whose nameplate read Thomas Wilson. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to listen carefully to every word my son was saying about me, about the woman he claimed no longer existed as the person I've always been. We have all the documentation here, Brian said, opening the folder on the counter. Medical assessments, the guardianship paperwork, everything properly notarized, as her son and legal guardian. I need to ensure her finances are properly managed during this difficult time. Mr. Wilson nodded sympathetically. Of course. Mr. Armstrong, this must be very difficult for your family. We see these situations more often than you'd think. It's been challenging, Brian sighed, his voice dropping to that practiced tone of controlled grief I'd heard him use when negotiating business deals. My wife and I just want what's best for her. We've set up a care facility that specializes in memory issues. Very expensive, but worth it for her comfort. Care facility memory issues. The words hit me like slaps. I'd had a memory screening just last year during my annual checkup. The doctor had said I was sharp as a tack for any age, let alone 68. That's when I noticed what Brian was pointing to in the folder, a form with my signature at the bottom. Except it wasn't my signature. Close, very close. But not mine. The D was too looped. The final E too curved. Someone had practiced it, perfected it. But it wasn't mine. My son was committing fraud. My son was trying to erase me. That's when I stepped forward, one foot after the other, slow and deliberate, until I was visible, until the sound of my flats against the polished tile made them turn. Brian's face drained of color. The manager blinked twice, startled. "Good morning," I said, my voice calm, cold. Brian opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I didn't mean," he started, but I raised my hand. "No, let's not waste your lies so early in the day." I looked at the branch manager. "I'm Diane Armstrong. This is my account. I am not under medical care. I have not authorized any guardianship or financial proxy, and I most certainly recognize everyone in my family, including my son, who appears to be committing fraud." Mr. Wilson's eyes widened, darting between Brian and me. "Mrs. Armstrong, may I see what my son has been showing you?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Brian's hand moved to cover the folder. "Mom, you're confused. Let me take you home, and we can talk about this." "I'm not confused, Brian, and I'm not going anywhere with you." I turned to Mr. Wilson. "I'd like to see those documents, please, and then I'd like to speak with your security team about a potential case of financial fraud." Mr. Wilson hesitated, then carefully slid the folder from under Brian's hand and passed it to me. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation in my office. Mrs. Armstrong." Brian stepped toward me, hands raised in appeasement. "Mom, please, this isn't what it looks like." I tilted my head slightly. "Really? Because to me it looks like you tried to bury me alive." He flinched at that. "Good." I wanted the words to cut. "You don't understand what's been happening," he said, lowering his voice. "You've been forgetting things, important things. Heather and I have been worried. This was just preparation." "Preparation," I repeated the word, letting it hang in the air between us. "Preparation for what?" "Exactly my convenient disappearance from my own life, access to my accounts, my house." Brian glanced nervously at Mr. Wilson, who was watching our exchange with increasing concern. "Mrs. Armstrong," Mr. Wilson interjected. "Would you like me to call someone for you? Another family member, perhaps, or the authorities?" "The authorities might be appropriate," I said, never taking my eyes off my son. "But first, I'd like to review exactly what's in this folder." Brian stepped back. "Mom, don't make a scene. Let's handle this as a family." That word family coming from him now felt like a mockery. Family doesn't forge signatures. Family doesn't declare you mentally incompetent behind your back. Family doesn't try to erase you while you're still breathing. "We're well past handling this as a family," I said quietly. Then I turned to Mr. Wilson. "I'd like to see your office now, please." As Mr. Wilson led me away, I heard Brian say something about calling Heather. Let him. I had a sinking feeling my daughter-in-law wasn't going to be surprised by any of this. In the privacy of Mr. Wilson's office, I opened the folder with trembling hands. What I found inside made my blood run cold. Medical assessments I'd never undergone. Declarations of mental incompetence signed by doctors I'd never met. A guardianship document with a forged signature that looked disturbingly like mine. Bank transfer forms, power of attorney papers, a complete package designed to erase Diane Armstrong and replace her with an asset to be managed. Mrs. Armstrong, these documents, Mr. Wilson began, are fraudulent. I finished for him. I have never been evaluated by these doctors. I have never signed these papers. I pulled out my driver's license and a credit card. Here's my identification. I want to review my account activity right now. Mr. Wilson's face was grave as he typed on his computer. There haven't been any unusual withdrawals yet, but there is a request for account access that was submitted yesterday. It hasn't been processed. Freeze everything, I said. No access to anyone but me, and I want to know if anyone tries. As Mr. Wilson made the necessary adjustments, I sat there, the folder in my lap, trying to process the depth of this betrayal. My own son and his wife had been planning to declare me incompetent, take control of my finances, and apparently ship me off to some care facility. How long had they been planning this? How many quiet conversations had they had while I knitted in the next room, planning my erasure? Mrs. Armstrong, Mr. Wilson said gently, would you like me to call the police? This appears to be attempted fraud. I considered it. Part of me wanted Brian to face consequences, to feel the same shock and betrayal I was feeling. But another part, the part that still remembered him as a little boy with skinned knees and a gap-toothed smile, hesitated. Not yet, I said finally. I need to understand the full situation first, but I would like copies of everything in this folder, and I'd like a record that I was here today, fully competent and aware. Mr. Wilson nodded. Of course, I'll have everything documented. He paused. And Mrs. Armstrong, for what it's worth, you seem perfectly lucid to me. A hollow laugh escaped me. Thank you. It's sad that needs to be said. As Mr. Wilson made copies, I glanced through the window of his office. Brian was gone. Of course he was. He'd run away, just like he'd done as a teenager whenever he was caught in a lie. Some things never change. I didn't drive straight home. I parked 3 blocks away from the house and just sat there in silence, watching strangers walk past, sipping coffee, holding hands, talking about weekend plans, as if the world hadn't just tilted off its axis. My knuckles were white around the steering wheel, but I hadn't moved. It was 10:42 a.m., too early to call it a bad day, too late to pretend it hadn't already turned into one. When I finally pulled into my own driveway, everything looked exactly the same. The rose bushes I'd planted with Robert 30 years ago still bloomed by the porch. The package I'd ordered new gardening gloves leaned against the screen door. A bird sang. The wind didn't care what I'd just discovered, but I did. I locked the front door behind me, walked into the kitchen, and placed the folder from the bank on the table. It sat there like a loaded weapon. I made myself a cup of tea chamomile, my hands still trembling slightly as I poured the hot water. Then I sat down and spread the documents across the oak table Robert and I had bought at an auction when we were first married, the table where Brian had done his homework, where we'd celebrated birthdays and Christmases, where I'd sat alone after Robert's funeral, surrounded by casserole dishes I couldn't bear to eat. Inside the folder were documents I hadn't signed, medical statements I hadn't seen, and declarations printed, stamped, notarized, claiming that I was mentally incompetent, that I was no longer capable of making decisions, that my assets required oversight, that my son, along with his wife, would act as my legal guardians until further notice. What an elegant way to say indefinitely. There was a neurologist's assessment, dated just 3 weeks ago, claiming I showed significant cognitive decline consistent with mid-stage dementia. Dr. Leonard Hoffman. I'd never heard of him, never set foot in his office. There was a form from something called Golden Sunset Care Home, with an intake date set for next month, $7,800 per month, to be paid directly from my accounts. My stomach turned. They'd already chosen my prison. I pulled a chair and sat down slowly, staring at the paperwork. They hadn't confronted me, hadn't asked if I was feeling lost or tired or confused. They'd decided in rooms I wasn't invited to that I was done, like a light bulb flickering one too many times. Time to replace. I poured myself a glass of water and didn't drink it. I just stared. The house was quiet around me, filled with memories that apparently Brian thought I no longer possessed. The corner where Robert's favorite chair had sat, until I finally donated it 3 years after his death. The wall of family photos that traced our lives. Brian's graduation, Heather and Brian's wedding, little Zoe's birth, the kitchen where I still cooked Sunday dinners for them twice a month. I didn't cry, but my hands started shaking just slightly. That's when I heard a car in the driveway. I recognized the soft purr of Heather's hybrid, my daughter-in-law, who 10 years ago had nervously asked if she could call me Mom instead of Diane, and I had hugged her and said of course. That Heather didn't notice the documents on the table at first. "Hey, Mom," she said casually, placing her purse on the counter, the familiar jingle of her bracelet, the one Zoe had made her for Mother's Day last year, filled the quiet kitchen. "Did you end up going to the—" She stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes landed on the folder, then on me. Something in her face shifted. A flicker. Not guilt. Not yet. Fear. "Where did you get that?" I didn't answer. She walked closer slowly. "Mom," she said, voice softer. "Listen, I can explain." I stood. "I'd like you to try." Okay, she started, rubbing her temple. A nervous habit I'd noticed years ago during her and Brian's engagement dinner. "This wasn't meant to be like this. We were just— Brian thought it was just to protect you in case something happened." "In case," I said. "Heather, those papers say it already did. They say I'm gone, that I don't remember who you are." She hesitated. "You didn't tell me," I continued, "that I'd become an inconvenience." Her mouth opened, but no words came. "I trusted you. I told you where the documents were, the passwords. I let you sit in every doctor's office. I gave you access." "I know," she whispered. "You used it." She nodded once, a guilty child. I waited for her to fight for me, to say it wasn't true, that I wasn't being erased. Instead, she sat down, quiet, and then she said the worst thing she could have said. "I didn't think you'd notice." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with their implication. Not just that they'd planned to declare me incompetent, but that they'd already written me off so completely they thought I wouldn't even notice my own life being stolen. I sat down across from her. No table between us now. Just silence. She avoided my eyes, still staring at the folder like it might jump up and explain itself. "So," I said calmly, "you didn't think I'd notice. That's what you said." Heather opened her mouth again, then closed it. Her fingers fidgeted with the jade bracelet on her wrist, a gift from her mother before she passed away. I'd always admired how she honored her Chinese heritage, incorporating it into our family traditions. Now I wondered if she'd learned deception from us or brought it with her. I leaned in slightly, not loud, not cruel, just sharp enough to cut. "Let me explain something to you. Heather, I notice everything. I always have." I tapped the folder once slowly. I noticed when Brian started calling me ma'am instead of mom last year. I noticed when you stopped asking me to babysit Zoe, said she was too much for me now. I noticed when the doctor's visits stopped having copies of my own test results sent to me. She flinched at that. "And you know what else I noticed?" I continued. "The way you looked relieved when I didn't come to Thanksgiving, like it made things easier." "That's not true," she whispered. "It is. But it doesn't matter now because what does matter is that you sat across from me for months, smiled at me, hugged me, and all the while you were signing me away like a used car title." Her eyes welled. But I wasn't moved. Tears don't undo signatures. At that moment, the front door opened and in walked Brian. He paused when he saw us. His eyes flicked to the folder, then to Heather, then to me. "Well," he muttered, "I guess the cat's out of the bag." "No," I said, standing. The cat was thrown out and she clawed her way back in. Brian rolled his eyes. Look, Mom, this isn't personal. You told a stranger I was mentally unfit to manage my own life. I cut in. You forged access to my accounts. You stood in a bank and told a man I didn't recognize my own son. How is that not personal? He raised his hands. We had documentation, medical input. We didn't do this on a whim. Who filled out those evaluations? He hesitated. Answer the question. Brian. We used notes from that memory screening last year. You mean the one I passed, the one where the doctor said I was sharp for my age? He said nothing. I stepped closer. He didn't move. You both made a decision to erase me, not because I was ill, but because I was inconvenient, because I wouldn't hand over full control, because I asked questions. Brian scoffed. You don't know how exhausting it's been managing everything, helping you, running the house. Oh, I see, I interrupted. So, I raised a son for 35 years, paid for college, for his wedding, gave you the down payment on your first house. But now that I need my own voice, I'm suddenly a burden. He bit his tongue. Heather tried to speak. Mom, please. No, I said, turning to her. You sat at my kitchen table for months, knowing what was happening. You knew they were preparing documents. You knew Brian was going to the bank. She nodded finally. I didn't want to believe it, she murmured. I thought if we never used the paperwork, it wouldn't matter. But you signed it? Her eyes dropped. And you taught your daughter, I said slowly, that it's okay to betray someone quietly as long as you smile while doing it. Heather finally broke. I didn't know what else to do. You're so strong. Mom, you never ask for help. And I thought if something did happen, we'd be ready. No, I replied. You weren't getting ready. You were getting rid of me. Silence. Then I walked to the drawer, pulled out a copy of my own will, held it in my hand, then looked at them both. This gets rewritten starting tomorrow, and you can be sure, very sure, that what just happened today will not be forgotten, not legally, not emotionally, not spiritually. I turned to Brian. You like to talk about protecting assets. Good, because starting today, you are no longer one of mine. Brian's face hardened. You're overreacting. We were trying to help you. Help me? I laughed, a dry sound that surprised even me. By declaring me incompetent, by forging my signature, by planning to ship me off to some facility that costs more per month than most people make. Golden Sunset is the best care home in the state, Heather interjected, as if that somehow made it better. I don't need a care home. My voice rose for the first time. I cook my own meals. I drive my own car. I manage my own finances better than the two of you manage yours, apparently, since you're so interested in my money. Brian's face flushed. That's not fair. We've helped you for years. Helped me? I echoed. By stopping by twice a month for dinner that I cook. By bringing Zoe over when you need a free babysitter. What exactly is this help you keep mentioning? We check on you, Brian insisted. We call. We make sure you're okay. You check on your investment. You mean, the words were bitter on my tongue, but I couldn't stop them. That's all I am to you now, isn't it? A house in a good neighborhood, accounts you think you're entitled to, a burden that might live too long and use up what you think should be yours. Heather was crying openly now. Brian just stood there, his jaw clenched, looking so much like his father in that moment that it made my heart ache despite everything. I want you both to leave, I said finally. Now. Take your betrayal and your plans and your concern and get out of my house. Mom, Heather started. Go, I repeated. I need time to think, time to decide what happens next. Brian looked like he might argue, but then he took Heather's arm. Fine, we'll go, but this conversation isn't over. You're right about that, I agreed. It's just beginning, but the next part will happen with my lawyer present. They left without another word, the door closing behind them with a soft click that seemed too gentle for the violence of what had just occurred. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by evidence of my almost erasure, and felt something I hadn't expected: relief. The truth, however painful, was now in the open. The masks were off, and in that moment, I made a promise to myself I would not go quietly. I would not be erased. I would not become a footnote in my own life story. I didn't sleep that night. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was simply awake, fully aware for the first time in years, as if something in me had reconnected. A wire that had gone cold now lit again. By 8:00 a.m., I had already made 2 phone calls, the first to my attorney, Daniel Morgan, who hadn't heard from me in over 3 years, the second to Michelle Washington, a financial advisor I hadn't needed since Robert passed. "Mrs. Armstrong," Daniel had said, his voice serious after I explained the situation. "What they attempted is elder abuse and fraud. We need to act quickly." And so my counterattack began. Not out of vengeance, though part of me wanted that, but out of self-preservation, because I had seen the future they planned for me, and I refused to step quietly into that waiting grave. By noon, I had canceled all automatic transfers linked to Brian's business account, 3 of them, set up over the past year, each one small enough that I hadn't questioned it. 200 here, 300 there. Money that apparently had been flowing steadily from my account to his failing consulting firm. By 1:00 p.m., I had changed the passwords to every online login I had: banking, email, investment accounts, even my Facebook page that I rarely used. Everything that Brian or Heather might have known or guessed. Make them impossible to guess, Michelle had advised over the phone. Nothing related to family birth dates or anniversaries, nothing they could know. So I chose random combinations of words and numbers that meant nothing to anyone but me. The street address of my first apartment after college, the name of the nurse who had helped deliver Brian, followed by the number of roses Robert had given me on our last anniversary. Things only I would remember, moments that belonged solely to me. And at 3:15 p.m., I sat across from Daniel Morgan in his downtown office, unfolding the documents they never expected me to see. He read in silence, his silver-rimmed glasses perched on his nose, his expression growing darker with each page he turned. "Diane," he said finally, using my first name, though he normally called me Mrs. Armstrong. "Do you want to press charges?" The question hung in the air between us. Did I want my son arrested for fraud? Did I want my daughter-in-law, the mother of my only grandchild, to face criminal penalties? The thought made my stomach knot. "No," I said calmly. "Not yet, but I do want a full forensic audit of every transaction tied to their names in the last 12 months. He nodded, making notes on a yellow legal pad. "I also want a new will. No half measures. Full update." His pen was ready. "And your beneficiaries?" "My granddaughter," I said. "She's 12, still honest for now." He smirked but didn't joke. He knew better. I continued. "Set up a trust with conditions. Zoe gets access at 25, with provisions for education earlier. And Brian and Heather. They're out of everything," he wrote in silence, and I watched it all unfold with a strange clarity. Like watching someone else's story. Like reading the end of a novel I didn't remember starting. Because the truth is, I had felt it coming. The way Brian suddenly became interested in helping with taxes. In the way Heather mentioned the house value during casual dinners. The quiet conversations that stopped when I walked in. But I'd ignored it because I wanted to believe I was loved without condition, and that was my real mistake. "We should also file for a restraining order," Daniel suggested, looking up from his notes. "A restraining order isn't that extreme. Diane, they were planning to have you declared incompetent and institutionalized so they could take your assets. That's not just a family disagreement. That's predatory behavior." Put like that, it sounded worse than even I had allowed myself to acknowledge. "All right. What does that involve?" "We'll file a petition based on the evidence we have. The forged documents alone are enough. It would prevent them from coming to your home or attempting to contact financial institutions on your behalf." "And Zoe?" My voice caught slightly. "Would it prevent me from seeing my granddaughter?" Daniel's expression softened. No, we can specify that supervised visits with Zoe are permitted, but given what they were planning, I wouldn't be surprised if they try to use her as leverage. The thought of not seeing Zoe made my chest tighten. She was the innocent in all of this. A bright, curious girl who loved to bake cookies with me and ask endless questions about the olden days. Let's proceed with the restraining order, I said finally. But I want to make sure it's clear that this isn't about Zoe. As I drove home, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the streets of the neighborhood I'd lived in for over 40 years. I knew every crack in the sidewalk, every seasonal change in the landscaping. This was my home, the place Robert and I had built our life, raised our son, planned to grow old together before cancer took him too soon. And Brian had been ready to sell it out from under me, to ship me off to some facility while they liquidated the physical evidence of my existence. I arrived home at 5:40 p.m. They were waiting. Heather on the couch, hands folded, Brian pacing by the fireplace like he owned the house. "Why did you cut the account?" he said before I even closed the door. I didn't answer. I walked to the kitchen, placed my bag down, and faced them both. "I went to my lawyer today." Brian's face tensed. Heather's eyes widened. I continued. "And here's what's going to happen next." Brian started to interrupt, but I held up a hand. He stopped. "I'm filing a statement revoking all guardianship attempts permanently, legally, retroactively." Brian laughed once, a dry, bitter sound. "You don't even know how—" "I know exactly how," I said. "Because while you were busy trying to act like the responsible son, you also left a paper trail so sloppy a third-year law student could tear it apart." He stepped back. Heather said nothing. "And the will," I added. "Changed effective immediately." Brian scoffed. "You're making a mistake." "No," I said. "You did. You assumed I'd stay silent, that I'd be too ashamed to fight back. You thought age meant weakness. It doesn't." Heather finally spoke. "We weren't going to use the guardianship." I turned to her. "Yes, you were. You were just waiting for the moment I said something you could twist. One forgotten appointment, one repeated story, one small slip." She blinked and didn't deny it. "You wanted the house," I said. "And the money. You thought if you took it slowly enough, I wouldn't notice." Brian crossed his arms. "You're not being fair." I walked past him, opened the hallway closet, and pulled out a folder I had prepared years ago. "This is the full list of everything your son will inherit one day," I said, handing it to Heather. "But not you, and not while I'm alive." Heather stared at it. Tears came. This time, I let them, but I didn't soften. I looked at her like a woman, not like my daughter-in-law. "You don't just lose inheritance, Heather. You lose trust. You lose what made this house a home," Brian muttered. "You'll regret this." I turned one last time. "No, I regret not seeing it sooner." They left without another word, the door slamming behind them with a finality that echoed through the empty house. I stood in the entryway for a long time, feeling both lighter and heavier all at once. By the time they came home again 3 days later, I was waiting. Not just awake, waiting. I sat in the same armchair I always used by the fireplace, the one they gradually started referring to as your little corner. Like my presence in my own house had been reduced to a piece of furniture. Heather walked in first, holding a takeout bag. Brian trailed behind, talking about an upcoming meeting. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me. Heather followed his gaze and froze. "What are you doing up?" she asked cautiously. I pointed to the table. The folder was back. Next to it, a printed letter. My lawyer's letterhead stamped clean across the top. Brian dropped his keys on the counter. "What is that?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood up and looked around the living room. My living room for what I realized might be the last time with them in it. "You moved into this house 3 years ago," I began. "After Brian lost his second job. You said it would be temporary." Heather opened her mouth, but I lifted a hand. "You said you needed help while adjusting. I agreed because that's what mothers do." Brian scoffed. "Are we doing this again?" No, I said. This time we're finishing it. I stepped closer to the table and tapped the letter. This is a formal 30-day eviction notice from my attorney. You'll both be out by the end of next month. Heather's voice cracked. Mom, you're kicking us out. No, I replied. You removed yourselves the moment you stood in a bank and told someone I was mentally gone. All I'm doing now is confirming it. Brian raised his voice. We supported you. You lived here rent-free. I snapped. I paid utilities, groceries, taxes, and kept quiet every time you brought up future plans that somehow always involved my house. I took a breath. Let's not pretend this arrangement was for my benefit. Heather stepped forward. We didn't mean for things to go this far. You did, I cut in. You just didn't think I'd notice, or that I'd ever say no. She blinked. But where are we supposed to go? I looked her straight in the eye. Somewhere that teaches you how to respect a roof that isn't yours. Brian crossed his arms. You're punishing your wife because of me. I smiled, not kindly. No, I'm holding you both accountable. She married you. She lied with you. She stayed silent with you. Heather's hands trembled. What about Zoe? Where is she supposed to sleep? I paused, then walked over to the side table and picked up a smaller folder. This is a trust, I said. Created today in Zoe's name. It's modest but real, and it's separate. She's 12 and not responsible for your decisions. I handed it to Heather. But she will learn from them, for better or worse. Brian's face twisted. You think this makes you some kind of hero? No, I replied. It makes me a woman who stopped apologizing for having boundaries. He turned to Heather. Say something. She didn't. She just stood there clutching the folder. You know what hurts the most, I said. Not that you lied. Not that you signed papers behind my back, but that you made me feel small in my own home. Like I should be grateful for not being completely erased. Heather looked up, eyes full of something that finally resembled remorse. I lost sight, she said softly. We got scared. We were drowning, and it felt easier to prepare for your absence than face our failures. I nodded. That's the first honest thing you've said in months. A silence hung between us. Then I spoke again quietly. This house, it used to be a home. Lately, it's felt like a waiting room for my own disappearance. Brian shifted. Heather took a step forward. Can we fix it? I looked at her for a long moment, then answered, Not here. They moved out 27 days later. No scene, no shouting, just boxes, a moving truck, and one quiet goodbye. Zoe hugged me longer than usual. I told her she could visit any time. Heather lingered on the porch, holding her purse like a shield. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. But I'm going to earn back your trust, she added. I tilted my head. Then I'll leave the porch light on. She smiled. Faint, tired, but real. That night, I opened the windows. The house was quiet. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like a razor. It felt like peace. I made tea, sat in my armchair, and I wrote a note. Let no one speak for you who wouldn't fight for you. I folded it and tucked it inside the front cover of my journal, a lesson in case Zoe ever finds it one day. And if she asks who taught me that, I'll tell her. Her father and mother did, the hard way. But that wasn't the end, just the beginning. 3 weeks after they moved out, I received a letter, not from Heather, but from a law firm I didn't recognize. Brian had filed a challenge to my competency evaluation. He was requesting a court-ordered psychiatric assessment, claiming the stress of recent events might have accelerated my decline. I called Daniel immediately. He's desperate, Daniel said, after I read him the letter, and sloppy. This is a play to buy time while he looks for actual evidence. Evidence of what I'm not incompetent. I know that, Diane, but Brian needs money, and you cut him off. People do desperate things when they're drowning. What do I need to do? I asked. We counterfile. I've already prepared the paperwork to challenge their guardianship attempt, but now we add a restraining order. This is harassment. A restraining order seems extreme, I said. Trust me. Diane, people who try to declare you incompetent when you're not don't suddenly develop boundaries. We need to set them now. I thought about it. What about Heather and Zoe? Daniel hesitated. The restraining order would only apply to Brian. Heather and Zoe could still visit, but I'd recommend caution there too. Caution, she's my daughter-in-law, who signed papers declaring you mentally incompetent without your knowledge. I'm not saying cut her off, I'm saying proceed carefully. I agreed to the restraining order against Brian. It felt strange, putting legal distance between myself and someone who had sat at my dinner table for years. But he'd already tried to erase me. I couldn't give him another chance. The next day, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Mom. Heather. I'm calling from a new phone. I didn't want Brian to know. My guard went up immediately. Why? She took a deep breath. He's not who I thought he was. Since we moved out, things have gotten difficult. He's angry all the time. He's talking about contesting your will, about proving you're unstable. He says we're entitled to the house. And what do you think? A pause. I think I've been blind. I knew he was under financial pressure, but I didn't realize how far he'd go. The day you caught him at the bank, he told me he was meeting with an investment advisor. I believed him. Why are you telling me this now? Because I found something on his laptop. Forms he was filling out to transfer your retirement accounts to a new bank. He already had your signature on them. I felt cold. My signature. He's been practicing it for months, ever since your birthday last year when you signed that card for Zoe. He kept it as a template. I remembered that card, a sparkly unicorn thing that Zoe had been so proud to give me. I need to talk to Daniel, I said. I'm so sorry. Mom, I should have seen this sooner. Yes, I replied. You should have. After hanging up, I sat still for a long time. The betrayal was deeper than I'd imagined. This wasn't just about control or convenience. This was calculated theft. I called Daniel, who immediately recommended we file a police report for attempted fraud. But that would implicate Heather too, I said. Diane, you're still protecting her. She was part of this. She called to warn me, after the fact. After they'd already tried and failed? He was right. But still. She's my daughter-in-law, Daniel sighed. All right, let's focus on Brian and the evidence Heather mentioned. Can she get copies of those documents? I'll ask. Heather agreed to copy what she could find. But she was scared. If Brian realizes I'm helping you, I don't know what he'll do. Are you in danger? I asked, suddenly worried. Not physically, but financially. Yes, he controls everything. I don't even have my own bank account anymore. Everything's joint. I hadn't known that. How had I missed it? My independent daughter-in-law, who'd run her own graphic design business before meeting Brian, didn't have her own bank account. Heather, how did this happen? She was quiet for a moment. Slowly, he said it was more efficient for tax purposes. Then it was easier for budgeting. Then it was just the way things were. It sounded familiar, too familiar. The same slow erosion of independence that they'd been attempting with me. We need to get you your own account, I said. I can't. He monitors everything. The statements come to our email, which he checks. Then we'll be careful. Tomorrow. I'm picking you up for lunch. Wear something nice. Tell Brian you're networking for a job. The next day, I drove Heather to Olivia Chen's house instead of a restaurant. Olivia had been my friend for years, a retired bank manager who knew her way around financial systems. So, this is your daughter-in-law, Olivia said, eyeing Heather carefully. The one who signed those papers. Heather looked down. Yes, ma'am. Olivia turned to me. You're sure about this, Shirley? I'm sure she needs help, I replied. And so do I. Olivia nodded and led us inside. For the next 2 hours, she helped Heather set up a new email account, a secure online banking profile, and a checking account with a different bank, one Brian had no connections to. We'll have statements sent to a P.O. box in my name. Olivia explained. No digital trail back to your home. You can check it when you come visit me for our book club. Heather looked overwhelmed. Why are you helping me after what I did? Olivia's face was stern. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for Diane, who for some reason still believes in you, and for your daughter, who deserves better than to watch her mother lose her identity. Heather nodded, tears in her eyes. Thank you. On the drive back, Heather was quiet. Finally, she spoke. I found more papers. Brian has a whole file on your assets. He's been planning this for over a year. I kept my eyes on the road. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't know at first. Then I didn't want to believe it. Then I was afraid. He made it sound reasonable, like we were just preparing for your future care. By the time I realized what was really happening, I felt trapped. You're a grown woman, Heather, with a design degree and your own business before you met Brian. I know, she whispered. That makes it worse, doesn't it? I should have known better. I pulled over to the side of the road and turned to face her. Do you remember what you used to tell me when you were first dating Brian about why you loved your work? She looked away. That I could create something from nothing. That I had the power to make people see things differently. You said you'd never give up that power. That being able to shape how people see the world was too important. A tear slid down her cheek. I remember. What happened to that Heather? She closed her eyes. She met Brian, and slowly, she disappeared. I reached over and took her hand. It was the first time I'd touched her since discovering the betrayal. Then it's time for her to come back. 2 days later, Heather called me in a panic. He knows, she said. Her voice hushed. I don't know how, but he knows I've been talking to you. He went through my phone while I was in the shower. Are you safe? I asked immediately. Yes, but he's furious. He says I've betrayed him, that I'm choosing you over our future. He mentioned taking Zoe to his parents in Arizona. My heart raced. He can't do that without your permission. Unless he convinces a judge I'm unstable, which is what he's threatening to do now. Where is he now? At work. But he's coming home early. I need to get Zoe from school. But I'm afraid. I'm on my way, I said, already grabbing my keys. Pack a bag for both of you. Just essentials. I called Daniel from the car, explaining the situation. This changes things, he said. If he's making threats about taking the child, we need to act fast. Go directly to Heather, get her and Zoe, and bring them to my office. Do not go back to your house. We don't know if Brian will go there looking for them. I agreed, and drove straight to their apartment. Heather was waiting outside with 2 small bags and a look of absolute terror. We need to get Zoe, she said, climbing into the car. School gets out in 20 minutes. We'll be there. As we pulled up to the elementary school, Heather spotted Brian's car already in the pickup line. He's here, she whispered. He beat us to it. I pulled into a space away from the line. Call the school office. Tell them not to release Zoe to him. Say it's an emergency. Heather made the call, her voice shaking as she explained to the school secretary. When she hung up, her face was pale. They'll hold her in the office, but we need to hurry. If Brian makes a scene, he won't, I said firmly. Not in public. He cares too much about appearances. We walked quickly into the school. Heather clutching my arm like she used to as a newlywed crossing the street at family gatherings. At the front office, we found Zoe sitting on a bench, looking confused and a little scared. Mommy, she said, jumping up. They said I couldn't go with Daddy. Is something wrong? Heather knelt down. We're going on a little trip, sweetie. Just us for a while. What about Daddy? Heather glanced at me, then back to her daughter. Daddy and I need some time apart. We're going to stay with Grandma. Zoe looked at me, her expression brightening. Really? For how long? As long as you need, I said, as we were leaving through a side door. A secretary hurried after us. "Mrs. Armstrong, your husband is at the front desk. He's quite insistent on seeing you." Heather tensed. "Please don't tell him which way we went." The woman nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Take care of yourself, Mrs. Armstrong." We made it to the car and drove directly to Daniel's office. The whole time, I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see Brian's silver sedan behind us. But there was nothing. At the law office, Daniel ushered us into a conference room and closed the door. "We need to file for emergency custody and a temporary restraining order," he said, placing a folder on the table. "Heather, I need you to document any threatening behavior, any controlling patterns, anything that would suggest Brian might be a danger to you or Zoe." Heather nodded, looking down at her daughter, who was coloring quietly with markers Daniel's assistant had provided. "Will this hurt her?" Heather asked softly. Daniel's face softened. "Divorce is never easy on children, but you know what's worse? Growing up watching one parent control and diminish the other. Kids see everything, even when we think they don't." Heather nodded and began writing, page after page of incidents, small controlling behaviors that had grown over time, financial restrictions, isolation from friends, and finally, the plot against me. As she wrote, I sat with Zoe, helping her color a picture of a unicorn. She seemed calm, adaptable in that way children often are in the midst of adult chaos. "Grandma," she said after a while, "are Mommy and Daddy fighting because of me?" My heart broke a little. "No, sweetheart, never because of you. Grown-ups sometimes have problems they need to work out. It has nothing to do with you." "But Daddy says Mommy spends too much money on my lessons, piano and swimming and stuff." I kept my voice steady. "Your lessons are important. They help you grow and learn. That's never a waste of money." She considered this, then went back to coloring. "I like staying with you. Your house smells like cookies." Despite everything, I smiled. "Well, we might have to make some then, won't we?" By evening, Daniel had filed the emergency paperwork, and a judge had granted a temporary order preventing Brian from approaching Heather. Zoe, or me. Heather was granted temporary full custody pending a hearing. We drove back to my house in silence, all three of us exhausted. As we pulled into the driveway, I noticed Brian's car parked across the street. "Stay in the car," I told Heather, my voice firm. "Lock the doors." I stepped out, the restraining order in my hand, and walked straight toward his car. He rolled down the window as I approached. "You can't be here. Brian, there's a restraining order." His face was a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You've turned my wife against me. You've stolen my family." "No," I said calmly. "You did that yourself when you decided to steal my identity, my home, and my dignity. Now leave, or I'm calling the police." He glanced past me to the car where Heather and Zoe sat watching. For a moment, I thought he might try something reckless. Then he started the engine. "This isn't over," he said, before driving away. I watched until his taillights disappeared around the corner, then returned to Heather and Zoe. "Is Daddy mad?" Zoe asked as we walked into the house. Heather looked at me helplessly. "Your daddy is confused right now," I said carefully. "Sometimes when grown-ups are confused, they get angry instead of asking for help. But that's not your worry, okay?" Zoe nodded, though I could tell she didn't fully understand. That night, after Zoe was asleep in the guest room, Heather and I sat in the kitchen, mugs of tea between us. "I'm so sorry," she said for what felt like the 100th time. "I never thought it would come to this." "Neither did I admitted. "But here we are. What happens now?" I looked at my daughter-in-law, really looked at her, the dark circles under her eyes, the way her shoulders hunched forward as if bearing an invisible weight. She looked both older than her years and somehow childlike in her vulnerability. "Now," I said, "we rebuild. We protect Zoe. We get you back on your feet. We face whatever Brian tries next." "And us?" she asked, her voice small. "Can we ever fix what I broke?" I thought carefully before answering. Trust, once shattered, doesn't simply reassemble itself. It must be reforged, different, but perhaps stronger in its mended places. We start by being honest with each other, I said. No more secrets, no more assuming we know what's best for each other without asking. She nodded, relief washing over her face. I can do that. And Heather, you need to find yourself again, the woman you were before Brian, the designer, the artist, the daughter-in-law who stood up for what was right. She looked down at her hands. I'm not sure I remember how to be her. Then we'll figure it out together. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I stood in the doorway of the guest room, watching Zoe's peaceful face in the dim glow of the nightlight. Heather was curled beside her, one arm protectively around her daughter, even in sleep. In the quiet darkness, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. The betrayal, the fear, the narrow escape from a future where I might have been erased completely from my own life. But I also felt something else, a steely resolve, a clarity of purpose I hadn't experienced since Robert died. Whatever came next, I would face it head on, for myself, for Heather, for Zoe. The next morning, I received a call from Daniel. Brian's filed a countersuit, he said without preamble. He's claiming Heather is emotionally unstable and that you've manipulated her into leaving him. He's requesting a psychological evaluation for both of you. I took a deep breath. He's desperate. Yes, but desperate people can be dangerous. He's also freezing all their joint accounts. Heather needs to transfer any money she can as soon as possible. I glanced into the living room where Heather was helping Zoe with breakfast. She already did. We set up new accounts 2 days ago. Smart move, but that's just the beginning. This could get ugly. Diane, are you prepared for that? I've lived through worse, I said, thinking of the years after Robert died. The slow, painful rebuild of a life without the person I'd thought would always be there. We'll handle it. After hanging up, I joined Heather and Zoe in the living room. Zoe was chattering about a school project, seemingly untroubled by the dramatic change in her circumstances. Children adapt, I thought, sometimes faster than adults. Heather, I said quietly when Zoe went to get her backpack, Brian's freezing your accounts, and he's filed for psychological evaluations for both of us. Her face paled. Can he do that? He can try. Daniel's already preparing our response, but I need to ask you something important. She nodded, waiting. Is there anything else I should know? Anything Brian might use against us that could blindside me or Daniel? Heather hesitated, and my heart sank. There was more. Last year, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, when you had that minor surgery for your knee, Brian suggested we talk to your doctor about cognitive testing. He told the doctor you'd been showing signs of confusion. I remembered that appointment. The doctor had asked me some unusual questions, but I'd thought nothing of it. The doctor didn't find anything concerning, Heather continued, but Brian insisted on a follow-up with a specialist. I went with him to that appointment. I let him speak for you. I closed my eyes briefly. And what did this specialist say? That you showed some normal age-related memory changes, but nothing pathological. Brian was disappointed. That's when he started talking about getting different medical opinions. I nodded slowly, processing this new betrayal. Thank you for telling me. Daniel needs to know this too. Heather looked ashamed. There's more. Brian has a friend who's a psychiatrist. He asked him to review your medical records unofficially. I don't know what this friend said, but Brian seemed pleased afterward. How did he get my records? Heather couldn't meet my eyes. I signed a release form. He said it was routine, for insurance purposes. Each revelation was like another small cut, but at least now we knew what we were facing. All right, I said finally. No more secrets from now on. We'll tell Daniel everything and prepare our defense. Over the next week, Daniel worked tirelessly, gathering evidence, filing motions, building our case. It turned out that Brian had left a trail of financial irregularities over the past year, small withdrawals from joint accounts that Heather hadn't noticed, credit card applications in her name, and most damning of all, forged signatures on investment documents bearing my name. "We have enough for criminal charges," Daniel told me one afternoon as we sat in his office. "Identity theft, forgery, financial exploitation of an elder. The district attorney is interested." I glanced at Heather, who sat beside me clutching a tissue. What would that mean for Heather and for Zoe? Daniel's expression softened. Heather's cooperation will count in her favor. As for Zoe, it's never easy when a parent faces legal troubles, but children are resilient, and she has both of you. Heather spoke up, her voice steadier than I expected. "I want him held accountable, whatever that means for me. I'll accept it, but I don't want Zoe to see her father in handcuffs." Daniel nodded. "We may be able to arrange a voluntary surrender if it comes to that. But first, let's see how the family court proceedings go. Brian's attorney has requested a settlement conference. That suggests they're looking for a way out." "What kind of settlement?" I asked. "They want to avoid the criminal charges, obviously." "In exchange, Brian would drop all claims regarding your competency, Diane, and agree to Heather's divorce terms." "And what would those terms be?" Heather asked. Daniel consulted his notes. "Full custody to you with supervised visitation for Brian, division of assets as per the prenuptial agreement, and he would need to complete financial counseling and anger management before visitation could become unsupervised." Heather looked surprised. "I didn't know we had leverage for all that." "The evidence of financial exploitation gives us significant leverage," Daniel explained. "Judges take a very dim view of someone trying to declare a competent elderly person incompetent for financial gain. Add in the documented pattern of controlling behavior toward you, and Brian's position is extremely weak." I considered this. "When is this settlement conference?" "Next Tuesday. You both should be there, though Zoe should not." After leaving Danielle's office, Heather and I walked to a nearby cafe. Zoe was at a play date with a school friend, giving us a rare moment alone. "Are you ready for this?" I asked as we settled into a corner table. Heather stirred her coffee absently. "I don't know if anyone's ever ready to face the person they thought they'd spend their life with in a courtroom." She looked up at me. "Does that sound naive?" "After everything." "No," I said gently. "It sounds human." She nodded, tears welling. "I keep thinking about when we met. He was so attentive, so interested in my work, my opinions. When did that become control? When did attention become surveillance? I should have seen it sooner." "These things happen gradually," I said. "Like water wearing away stone. You don't notice the change day by day. Only when you step back and see how much has been eroded. I was supposed to be smarter than this. I'm a graphic designer. For God's sake. I'm trained to see patterns and details. Intelligence doesn't make you immune to manipulation. Sometimes it makes you more vulnerable because you trust your own judgment so completely." She looked at me with new understanding. "Is that what happened with you?" "You trusted your judgment about us." I considered this. I trusted that my family wouldn't harm me. That trust blinded me to the signs that something was wrong. "I'm so sorry, Mom." "I know." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "We both made mistakes. Now we fix them." Tuesday arrived cold and bright. We left Zoe with Olivia, who had become a steady presence in our lives, a sturdy bridge between our past and whatever future we were building. The courthouse was imposing, all marble and echoing hallways. Heather walked beside me, her navy suit crisp, her back straight. She looked like the professional she'd once been, before Brian had gradually convinced her to give up her practice to focus on family. We met Daniel in a small conference room. He was reviewing documents, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. "They're already here," he said, looking up. "Brian and his attorney arrived early." Heather tensed. "Has he said anything?" "Not directly, but his attorney hints he might be willing to accept most of our terms if we drop the potential criminal charges." I frowned. That sounds like he's admitting guilt. "In a roundabout way, yes, but in settlement negotiations, it's not a formal admission." Heather took a deep breath. "Let's hear what they have to say." The settlement conference was held in a private room with a mediator, a retired judge who now specialized in family disputes. Brian sat across the table, dressed in the same pale gray suit he'd worn that day at the bank. The sight of it made my stomach clench. He barely looked at me, his eyes fixed on Heather with an intensity that seemed to waver between anger and pleading. She met his gaze steadily, giving nothing away. The mediator began by establishing ground rules, then invited Brian's attorney to present their settlement offer. My client is prepared to accept the terms regarding division of assets as outlined in the prenuptial agreement, the attorney began, a woman in her 50s with a severe haircut and sharp eyes. He will agree to Mrs. Armstrong having primary physical custody of their daughter, with standard visitation rights for Mr. Armstrong. Daniel interrupted smoothly. Our position is that visitation should be supervised initially. Brian's attorney frowned. My client finds that unnecessarily restrictive. He has never been anything but a loving father. Heather spoke up, her voice clear. A loving father doesn't threaten to take his child across state lines to separate her from her mother. A loving father doesn't use his child as leverage in a divorce. Brian's face darkened. I never... Mr. Armstrong, the mediator cautioned. Please allow your attorney to speak for you. Brian fell silent, but his eyes burned with barely contained rage. His attorney continued. My client is willing to drop all claims regarding Mrs. Armstrong's mother's competency and will agree not to contest any changes to her will or financial arrangements. I noticed she didn't address Heather's point about Zoe. Daniel leaned forward. And what does your client expect in return for these concessions? That Mrs. Armstrong Sr. agree not to pursue criminal charges related to any alleged financial improprieties. Daniel looked at me. We had discussed this possibility. Criminal charges would mean a public trial, exposure for Heather, and most importantly, trauma for Zoe. We would need more than just dropping the competency claims, I said calmly. We would need a formal written admission of what was done and why. Brian's attorney started to object, but Brian himself interrupted. What's the point of that, just to humiliate me? No, I replied, looking him directly in the eye for the first time. For protection. So there's a record if you ever try something like this again. The mediator intervened. Perhaps we could draft a confidential admission that would be filed under seal with the court. It would provide the protection Mrs. Armstrong Sr. is seeking without public exposure. After some discussion, Brian's attorney agreed to this compromise. We spent the next 2 hours negotiating the specific terms of the settlement. Brian would admit to forging my signature and filing false claims about my mental competency. He would relinquish all claims to my assets and agree to supervised visitation with Zoe for 6 months, after which the arrangement would be reviewed. In exchange, I would not pursue criminal charges, and Heather would not seek punitive damages in the divorce. By the end of the session, we had a framework for settlement. The attorneys would draft the formal agreement, and we would reconvene in a week to sign. As we prepared to leave, Brian asked if he could speak to Heather alone for a moment. She looked at me uncertainly. It's your choice, I said. You don't have to. She hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes, in the conference room with the door open. Daniel and I waited in the hallway. I couldn't hear what was said, but I could see them through the doorway. Brian speaking intensely, leaning toward Heather. Heather standing straight, arms crossed, shaking her head. After exactly 5 minutes, she walked out, her face composed but pale. Everything okay? I asked, as we walked to the parking lot. He wanted me to reconsider, said we could work things out, that he'd changed. And what did you say? A small, sad smile crossed her face. I said people don't change in 2 months, and that even if he had, some bridges can't be unburned. I nodded, proud of her strength. He also said I'd regret choosing you over him, that you'd control me just like he did, only I was too blind to see it. I stopped walking. Heather. Don't worry, she said. I told him the difference is that you've never asked me to be less than I am. He never wanted anything else. The week passed quietly. Zoe settled into a routine at school, making new friends, and bringing home art projects that now decorated my refrigerator. Heather began consulting with her old design firm, tentatively stepping back into the career she'd abandoned, and I found myself rediscovering the pleasure of having my home filled with family again, but this time on my terms. No one referred to my favorite chair as your little corner anymore. No one suggested I might be confused when I couldn't find my reading glasses. No one monitored my comings and goings like I was a wayward teenager. The day we were to sign the settlement agreement, Heather received a text from Brian. "He's not coming," she said, staring at her phone. "He says he's reconsidered and wants to take his chances in court." Daniel immediately called Brian's attorney, who seemed equally surprised. "This is highly irregular," she said. "Let me speak with my client and call you back." We waited in Daniel's office, the tension building with each passing minute. When the phone finally rang, Daniel put it on speaker. "I apologize for my client's message," Brian's attorney said, sounding strained. "After our conversation, he has agreed to proceed with the settlement as planned. However, he insists on one additional condition." "Which is?" Daniel asked. "He wants a face-to-face apology from Mrs. Armstrong Sr. for, and I quote, turning his wife against him and destroying his family." I felt a surge of anger so strong it momentarily took my breath away. "Absolutely not," Heather snapped before I could respond. "My mother-in-law has nothing to apologize for." "I understand your position," the attorney said diplomatically, "but my client is adamant. Without this, he's prepared to contest everything in court." Daniel muted the phone. "It's a power play," he said to us. "One last attempt to assert control. We don't have to agree." "But if we don't," Heather said, "we're looking at months of court battles, more stress for Zoe." I thought for a moment. "I'll do it." Heather looked shocked. "Mom, no. You don't owe him anything." "I know," I said, "but this isn't about what I owe him. It's about ending this now, on our terms. Besides," I added with a slight smile, "he didn't specify what kind of apology I have to give." Daniel unmuted the phone. "Mrs. Armstrong agrees to meet with Mr. Armstrong before the signing, with counsel present." The attorney sounded relieved. "Excellent. Shall we say 1 p.m. at our offices?" We arrived at precisely 100 p. Brian was already there, sitting in a conference room with his attorney. He stood when we entered, his eyes fixed on me with a mixture of triumph and resentment. "Mrs. Armstrong has agreed to speak with you before the signing," his attorney began. "Alone," Brian interrupted. "That wasn't the agreement," Daniel objected. I raised a hand. "It's fine. I can handle this." I looked at Brian. 5 minutes. Door stays open." The attorneys and Heather stepped outside. Though I noticed Daniel positioned himself where he could see into the room, I sat across from Brian, my hands folded calmly on the table. "Well," he said after a moment, "I'm waiting for my apology." I looked at him, really looked at him, seeing beyond the expensive suit and carefully controlled expression to the insecurity beneath. In that moment, I felt something unexpected, not forgiveness, exactly, but a kind of clarity. "Brian," I began, my voice steady. "I'm sorry." He smiled slightly, satisfied. "I'm sorry I didn't see sooner what kind of man you really are. I'm sorry I welcomed you into my home and treated you like family when you were already plotting to take everything from me. I'm sorry I didn't protect Heather from your manipulation earlier." His smile vanished. I'm not finished," I continued calmly. "I'm also sorry for you. Sorry that you're so empty inside that you need to control and diminish others to feel powerful. Sorry that you'll never know the kind of love that doesn't keep score or demand submission. Sorry that you've lost a wife who would have stood by you through anything if you'd only treated her with respect." Brian's face flushed dark red. "You think you've won, don't you? That you've turned Heather against me for good." "This isn't about winning, Brian. It's about truth. And the truth is, you did this to yourself. I just helped Heather see it." He leaned forward, voice low. "She'll come back to me eventually. She always does. And when she does, I'll make sure she understands exactly what kind of mother-in-law she has. I stood up. Our 5 minutes are up. I fulfilled my obligation. Now let's sign these papers and end this chapter for good. He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded once, sharply. Fine, let's get this over with. The signing itself was anticlimactic, just signatures on documents, formal handshakes, and carefully neutral expressions. When it was done, Brian left without looking back, his attorney hurrying behind him. In the car afterward, Heather exhaled deeply. It's really over, isn't it? This part is, I said. Now we rebuild. 6 months later, on a warm spring day, I sat in my garden planting marigolds, while Zoe chatted beside me, her small hands patting soil around seedlings. Heather was inside the house. On a work call, she had recently taken a position with a nonprofit that advocated for elderly rights. Inspired, she said, by what had happened to me. Grandma, Zoe said suddenly, remember when we came to live with you and Mommy was sad all the time? I nodded, unsure where this was going. She's not sad anymore. She laughs a lot now, and she doesn't look at her phone all worried like she used to when Daddy would text her. I've noticed that too, I said, smiling. Daddy still gets mad sometimes at our visits. He asks lots of questions about you and Mommy, but Ms. Peterson says I don't have to answer if I don't want to. I kept my expression neutral, though inwardly, I bristled at the thought of Brian using Zoe for information. That's right, Ms. Peterson is very wise. Zoe planted another seedling, her face serious with concentration. I think Daddy made a mistake. What kind of mistake? Sweetheart. He thought he could make Mommy small so he could feel big, but that's not how it works. She looked up at me, her eyes wise beyond her years. People aren't like balloons. You can't make yourself bigger by making someone else smaller. I blinked back sudden tears. That's very true. Zoe, where did you learn that? She shrugged. I just figured it out. Then she grinned. Plus, I heard Mommy telling her friend on the phone. I laughed, pulling her into a hug, smudging dirt on both our clothes. Over her shoulder, I saw Heather watching us from the window, a smile on her face. Later that evening, after Zoe was in bed, Heather joined me on the porch with 2 glasses of wine. To new beginnings, she said, raising her glass. And hard-won wisdom, I added. We clinked glasses gently. I found an apartment, she said after a moment. It's close by, just 10 minutes away, 2 bedrooms, a little balcony for plants. The lease starts next month. I nodded, feeling the expected twinge of sadness but also pride. That's wonderful. Zoe will love having her own space to decorate. We'll be here all the time, Heather assured me. Sunday dinners, weekends, whenever you want. I know, I smiled. It's time. You're ready. She looked at me thoughtfully. What about you? What's next for Diane Armstrong? I considered this. The past 6 months had been so focused on helping Heather and Zoe heal, on legal battles and emotional recovery, that I hadn't thought much about my own future. I'm not entirely sure, I admitted, but I think it might involve that travel I've been putting off, maybe some volunteer work, perhaps even dating again. I laughed at Heather's surprised expression. Don't look so shocked. I'm not dead yet. I just never thought about you dating, after Robert. I didn't either, for a long time, but recently I've been thinking that there might be more chapters left in my story. Heather raised her glass again. To your next chapter. Then, may it be an adventure of your choosing. And to yours, I replied. Written in your own voice, not someone else's. As we sat watching the evening settle around us, I felt a sense of peace that had been missing for too long. The betrayal that had rocked our family had also, unexpectedly, set us free Heather from a controlling marriage, me from the quiet diminishment I had been accepting without even realizing it. Sometimes it takes a seismic shock to remind us of our own strength, to show us that we are not defined by how others see us, but by how we see ourselves, that we are never too old to stand up and say, this is who I am, this is what I deserve, This is the life I choose. And if someone tries to tell you otherwise, well, just remember the cat may be thrown out, but she can always claw her way back in, stronger, wiser, and ready to reclaim her place in the sun. I'm glad you followed my story to the end. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and don't forget to tell me what city you're watching from. If you enjoyed this story, check out My Son Said I Was Too Old to Work in His Company, and After My Husband Died, His Brother Demanded the House, two other stories that are channel favorites.